Jake Morrison stared at the empty bottle in his hand. The cheap whiskey had done nothing to help him sleep again. 6 months since the war ended, and he still woke up in cold sweats every night. The dreams always came back. Fire, screaming, blue blood on his hands. His small apartment on Europa Station felt like a prison cell. The walls were too close. The air recycler made too much noise. Everything reminded him of the warships he had lived on for 3 years. 3 years of fighting aliens across half the galaxy. 3 years of watching good people die. The door chime rang. Jake looked at the clock. It was barely 8 in the morning. Nobody visited him anymore. His old friends from the Marines had either died in the war or moved on with their lives. Jake could not move on. He opened the door and froze. Captain Ben Cole stood in the hallway wearing his dress uniform. Jake had not seen his old commander since the victory parade on Earth. Cole looked older now. Gray hair at his temples, lines around his eyes. "Hello, Jake," Cole said. "Can I come in?" Jake stepped aside. Cole looked around the messy apartment but said nothing. Empty food containers covered the small table. Dirty clothes lay on the floor. The place smelled like old alcohol and despair. "You look terrible," Cole said. "Thanks. That makes me feel much better." Jake sat down on his couch. "What do you want, Ben?" Cole sat across from him. "I have a job for you." "I already have a job. I fix broken machines in the cargo bay." "This is different. Better pay." "Much better." Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Let me guess. You want me to kill more aliens?" "No, I want you to protect one." That got Jake's attention. He looked at Cole carefully. His old captain was serious. "Protect an alien? Are you crazy?" "The war is over, Jake. We need to make peace work. There are negotiations happening on Kepler Station. Important talks between our people and the Zephyrians." Jake knew about the peace talks. Everyone did. The news channels talked about them every day. Politicians from both sides making speeches about friendship and cooperation. It all sounded like lies to Jake. He had seen what the Zephyrians could do in battle. "So what does this have to do with me?" Jake asked. "One of their diplomats needs protection. Someone tried to kill her last week. We need a bodyguard." "Get someone else." "I'm done fighting." Cole leaned forward. "This isn't fighting, Jake. It's protecting. There's a difference." "Not to me. The job pays 50,000 credits for 1 month of work." Jake's eyes widened. 50,000 credits was more money than he had ever seen. With that much, he could get off Europa Station. Maybe find a quiet planet somewhere and try to forget about the war. "Why me?" Jake asked. "There are plenty of security companies, professional bodyguards." "Because you're the best soldier I ever commanded. And because you speak Zephyrian." That was true. Jake had learned the alien language during the war. "Know your enemy," the training manual said. It had helped him interrogate prisoners and understand their battle communications. He had never thought it would be useful for anything else. "What's so special about this diplomat?" Jake asked. Cole hesitated. "Her name is Lyra Vex. She's young, about your age. The Zephyrians say she's very important to the peace process." "And someone wants her dead. Several someones, probably. Not everyone wants this peace to work. There are extremists on both sides." Jake thought about it. The money was tempting. And maybe Cole was right. Maybe protecting someone was different from killing. Maybe it was a way to balance the scales after all the death he had caused. "Where is this happening?" Jake asked. "Kepler Station. It's neutral territory, run by the trading guilds." Jake had heard of Kepler Station. It was a massive space station at the edge of human space, a place where humans and aliens had done business even during the war. If you wanted to disappear, Kepler was a good place to do it. "How dangerous is this job really?" Jake asked. Cole met his eyes. "Dangerous enough that I'm asking you to do it instead of someone else." That was honest, at least. Jake appreciated honesty. He had heard enough lies from politicians and generals during the war. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow. There's a transport leaving for Kepler at noon." Cole stood up and walked to the door. Then he turned back. "Jake, this could be good for you. A chance to do something positive, something that matters." After Cole left, Jake sat alone in his apartment. He looked around at the mess he had made of his life. Maybe his old captain was right. Maybe this was a chance to do something good for once. He spent the rest of the day packing his few belongings. He did not have much: some clothes, his old Marine gear, a few weapons that he probably should not have kept after leaving the service. That night, Jake slept better than he had in months. For the first time since the war ended, he had something to do. A mission, even if it was just babysitting an alien. Diplomat, it was better than fixing broken machines and drinking cheap whiskey. The transport to Kepler Station was crowded with traders and travelers. Jake kept to himself during the 3-day journey. He studied the files Cole had given him about Lyra Vex and the peace negotiations. The files did not tell him much. Lyra Vex was 26 years old. She had been born on Zephyr Prime, the alien homeworld. She had studied diplomacy at their best universities. She was considered brilliant by her people. The photo in the file showed a beautiful woman with the typical Zephyrian features: silver blue skin that seemed to glow with its own light, large eyes that were almost purple, delicate features that looked almost human except for the small markings around her eyes and temples. Jake tried not to think about how attractive she was. This was a job, nothing more. He would protect her, collect his money, and move on with his life. When the transport arrived at Kepler Station, Jake was impressed despite himself. The station was huge, bigger than most cities. Ships from dozens of different species docked at its ports. The main corridors were filled with humans, Zephyrians, and other aliens Jake did not recognize. He made his way to the diplomatic section of the station. The security there was tight. Human and Zephyrian guards worked together, checking everyone who entered. Jake showed his credentials to a human security officer. The man looked at Jake's military record and nodded with respect. "Sergeant Morrison, Captain Cole is waiting for you in Conference Room 7. Jake found Cole talking with a tall woman in an admiral's uniform. Jake recognized her from the news broadcasts. Admiral Lisa Grant, one of the heroes of the war. "Jake," Cole said, "this is Admiral Grant. She's in charge of security for the human delegation." Grant looked Jake up and down. "I've read your file, Sergeant. Impressive record. I hope you're ready for this assignment." "Where is she?" Jake asked. "Meeting with her own people. You'll meet her tomorrow morning. For now, get settled in. Your room is next to hers." Jake nodded. He was ready to get started, ready to earn his 50,000 credits and put the war behind him once and for all. He had no idea that meeting Lyra Vex would change his life forever. Jake woke up early the next morning. Old habits from the Marines died hard. He showered, dressed in clean clothes, and checked his weapons. The station allowed him to carry a sidearm as part of his security clearance. At exactly 8 o'clock, he knocked on the door next to his room. A soft voice answered in perfect English. "Come in." Jake entered and stopped. The photo in the file had not done Lyra Vex justice. She was beautiful in a way that made his breath catch. Her silver blue skin seemed to shimmer in the room's light. She wore a simple white dress that looked elegant and practical at the same time. But it was her eyes that caught his attention. They were intelligent, alert, and they studied him just as carefully as he studied her. "You must be Jake Morrison," she said. She did not offer to shake hands. Zephyrians did not like to be touched by strangers. "That's right. I'm here to keep you safe." "Do you think I need keeping safe?" There was something in her voice. A challenge, maybe. Jake looked around her room. It was neat and organized. Her belongings were arranged carefully. Everything had a purpose and a place. This was not the room of a pampered diplomat. "Someone tried to kill you last week," Jake said. "So yes, I think you need protection." Lyra smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "That was different. A lone fanatic with a knife. Easy to handle." "You handled it yourself?" "I had help." She did not explain what kind of help. Jake made a mental note to ask Cole about the details of the attack. The file had been vague about what actually happened. "So what's the plan for today?" Jake asked. "Meetings. Boring diplomatic meetings where humans and Zephyrians pretend to trust each other." Her honesty surprised him. Most diplomats Jake had met during the war were careful with their words. They never said what they really thought. "You don't sound very excited about making peace." Lyra walked to the window. Outside, ships came and went from the station's docking bays. "Peace is necessary. That doesn't make it easy." Jake understood that feeling. He had killed Zephyrians during the war. Now he was supposed to protect one. Nothing about the situation felt natural. They spent the morning in meeting rooms filled with humans and Zephyrians in expensive suits. Jake stood by the wall and watched. The diplomats talked about trade agreements and border controls. They spoke in careful, polite language that meant nothing. Lyra participated in the discussions, but Jake noticed she seemed bored. Her attention wandered around the room. Sometimes she looked directly at him. Their eyes would meet for a moment before she looked away. During a lunch break, Jake followed Lyra to the station's observation deck. It was a quiet place with large windows that showed the stars outside. "Do you always stare at people during meetings?" she asked without turning around. "It's my job to watch for threats." "And do you see any threats?" Jake looked at the other people on the observation deck. A few human traders, some alien tourists he did not recognize. Nobody looked. "Dangerous. Not right now." Lyra finally turned to face him. "What do you think of me, Jake Morrison?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what do you see when you look at me? An enemy? A job? Something else?" Jake thought about how to answer. The truth was complicated. When he looked at Lyra, he saw someone who was clearly intelligent and strong, someone who carried herself like a fighter, not a diplomat. And yes, someone who was beautiful in a way that made it hard to concentrate on. His job. "I see someone who's more than she appears to be," he said finally. Lyra smiled, and this time it was real. "That's a very diplomatic answer. I learned from the best." They were interrupted by a loud alarm. The lights on the observation deck flickered and went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in red light. "What's happening?" Lyra asked. Jake was already moving. He grabbed her arm and pulled her away from the large windows. "Power failure. Could be an attack." His radio crackled. Cole's voice came through the static. "All security teams, we have multiple system failures throughout the station. Unknown cause." Jake looked around the observation deck. The other people were confused, but not panicking. If this was an attack, it was not obvious. "We need to get back to your room," Jake told Lyra. But as they moved toward the exit, Jake noticed something strange. Lyra did not seem surprised by the power failure. In fact, she looked almost guilty. The corridors were crowded with confused people. The station's artificial gravity fluctuated, making everyone stumble. Jake kept his hand on his weapon and stayed close to Lyra. They made it back to the diplomatic section without incident. But as soon as they entered Lyra's room, Jake confronted her. "You knew that was going to happen. I don't know what you mean." "The power failure. You weren't surprised. You looked guilty." Lyra sat down on her bed. For a moment, she looked very young and very tired. "You're very observant. It's part of my training. What aren't you telling me?" Lyra was quiet for a long time. Jake waited. He had learned patience during the war. Sometimes waiting was the best way to get information. "There are things about me that are not in your files," she said finally. "What kind of things?" "Dangerous things." Before Jake could ask more questions, the lights went out again. This time, they stayed out longer. When they came back on, Jake noticed something that made his blood run cold. The security cameras in the hallway were sparking. Smoke rose from their broken circuits. But there had been no explosion, no obvious cause for the damage. Jake looked at Lyra. She was staring at her hands like they had betrayed her. "It's you," he said. "You're causing the power failures." Lyra looked up at him. Her purple eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I can't control it sometimes. When I get stressed or scared, it just happens." "What happens? What are you?" "I'm what your people call a conductor. I can manipulate electromagnetic fields." Jake had heard rumors about conductors during the war. Zephyrians with special abilities who could disable weapons and destroy equipment. Military intelligence had said they were all dead, hunted down and killed by both sides because they were too dangerous. I thought conductors were extinct. Most of us are. I'm one of the last. Jake understood now why someone had tried to kill her, why the peace negotiations were so important. A living conductor was incredibly valuable and incredibly dangerous. How? Many people know what you are. Very few. My government wants to keep it secret. They're afraid of what would happen if your people found out. Jake thought about that. If the human military knew there was a conductor on Kepler Station, they would want to capture her, study her, use her abilities as a weapon. Who tried to kill you last week? I don't know. It could have been anyone. Humans who want to capture me. Zephyrians who think I'm too dangerous to live. There are extremists on both sides who would rather see the war continue than see peace succeed. Jake made a decision. It was probably a stupid decision, but it felt right. I'll keep your secret, he said. Why? Because everyone deserves a chance at peace, even conductors. Lyra smiled through her tears. Thank you. But Jake was already thinking about the implications. If Lyra's abilities were acting up due to stress, the peace negotiations were going to be a problem. Diplomacy was stressful by nature, and if she lost control at the wrong moment, it could start the war all over again. We need to work on controlling your abilities, he said. I've been trying for years. It doesn't get easier. Then we'll try harder. Because if the wrong people find out what you are, this protection detail is going to become a lot more complicated. Jake had no idea how complicated things were about to become, but he was starting to realize that protecting Lyra Vex was going to be the most important mission of his life. 3 days passed without incident. Jake stayed close to Lyra during the diplomatic meetings. She seemed more relaxed now that someone knew her secret. The power failures stopped happening. Jake found himself enjoying her company more than he expected. Lyra was smart and funny. She asked him questions about human culture that made him think. She told him stories about Zephyr Prime that were nothing like the propaganda he had heard during the war. Late at night, when the station was quiet, they would sit in her room and talk. Jake told her about growing up on Mars Colony, about joining the Marines to see the galaxy, about the battles he had fought and the friends he had lost. Lyra told him about her childhood on Zephyr Prime, about discovering her abilities when she was 12 years old, about watching other conductors disappear one by one as the war got worse. My parents sent me away when I was 16, she said one night. They knew it wasn't safe for me to stay. Where did you go? A hidden colony in the Outer Rim. There were maybe 20 of us left by then. Conductors and their families. We lived quietly and tried not to attract attention. What happened to the others? Lyra's expression grew sad. Some were captured. Some were killed. A few just disappeared. I came back to Zephyr Prime after the war ended. The government needed someone for the peace talks, someone they could trust to represent our interests, and someone whose abilities might be useful if the talks failed. Yes. She looked at him carefully. Does that bother you? Jake thought. About it. During the war, he would have been terrified to know he was sitting next to a conductor. Now, it just made him want to protect her more. No, he said. It doesn't bother me. On the 4th morning, everything changed. Jake was having breakfast in the station's main cafeteria when Cole found him. His old captain looked worried. We have a problem, Cole said, sitting down across from Jake. What kind of problem? The kind that involves Commander Rick Hayes. Jake knew that name. Hayes was military intelligence, a cold, calculating man who had interrogated captured Zephyrians during the war. Jake had never liked him. What does Hayes want? He's here, on the station, with a full intelligence team. Jake felt his stomach drop. Official business? That's what he claims. Says he's here to provide additional security for the negotiations. Jake knew better. Hayes did not care about diplomacy. If he was here, it was because he wanted something. Something valuable. He knows about Lyra, doesn't he? Cole nodded grimly. I think so. Someone leaked information about the power failures. Hayes put 2 and 2 together. Jake stood up quickly. I need to warn her. But when he got back to the diplomatic section, it was too late. Lyra's room was empty. Her belongings were gone. Jake found a human security guard in the hallway. Where is the Zephyrian diplomat? Commander Hayes transferred her to a secure location. Said there was a credible threat against her life. Jake's blood ran cold. He knew what Hayes meant by secure location. It meant an interrogation room. It meant Lyra was now a prisoner. Jake found Cole in the security office. Where did Hayes take her? Level 15. Section C. Jake, you can't. But Jake was already moving. He took the elevator down to level 15. The corridors there were different. Sterile. Military. This was where the station kept its holding cells for dangerous prisoners. 2 human soldiers stood guard outside Section C. They were armed and alert. Jake approached them casually. Commander, Hayes sent me. I'm supposed to relieve you for lunch. The soldiers looked at each other uncertainly. Jake was wearing civilian clothes, but he carried himself like military. His confidence sold the lie. We weren't told about any relief, one of them said. Hayes is running a classified operation. He doesn't tell everyone everything. Jake moved closer. When he was in arm's reach, he struck fast and hard. Both soldiers went down without making a sound. Jake dragged them into a nearby storage room and took their weapons. The door to Section C required a key card. Jake used one from the unconscious soldiers. Inside, he found a corridor lined with holding cells. Most were empty. He found Lyra in the last cell. She was sitting on a narrow bed, staring at the wall. When she saw him, her eyes widened with relief. Jake, how did you... No time to explain. He used the keycard to open her cell. We need to... Get out of here! But as they stepped into the corridor, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Red lights flashed. Jake's radio crackled with urgent voices. All security teams, we have a prisoner escape on level 15. Lock down all exits, Jake cursed. Someone had found the unconscious guards. They had maybe minutes before the station, was crawling with security. Can you use your abilities to help us? He asked Lyra. I'll try. But if I lose control, we'll deal with that later. They moved quickly through the corridors. Jake led the way, using back passages and maintenance tunnels he had memorized during his first days on the station. Behind them, they could hear boots on metal floors, voices shouting orders. The security teams were getting closer. They reached a maintenance shaft that led to the cargo levels. Jake helped Lyra climb up into the narrow space. Where are we going? She asked. The docking bays. If we can steal a ship... The lights around them suddenly flickered and died. Lyra's stress was affecting her abilities again. In the darkness, Jake heard her breathing heavily. I'm sorry, she whispered. I can't control it when I'm scared. It's okay. Just breathe. Focus on my voice. Jake found a small flashlight in his pocket. The weak light helped Lyra calm down. The power flickered back on. They crawled through the maintenance shaft for what felt like hours. Finally, they reached an access panel that opened into the cargo bay levels. The cargo bays were busy even during the lockdown. Ships came and went constantly on a station like Kepler. Jake hoped they could blend in with the crowd. But as they emerged from the maintenance shaft, Jake saw Commander Hayes waiting for them. He had 20 soldiers with him. All of them had weapons pointed at Jake and Lyra. Sergeant Morrison, Hayes said calmly. You're making a big mistake. Jake stepped in front of Lyra. The only mistake is trusting you. Miss Vex is a valuable asset to the Terran Federation. We need to understand her abilities, study them, learn how they can be used to benefit humanity. She's not a weapon, Jake said. Everything is a weapon if you know how to use it. Hayes gestured to his soldiers. Take them both into custody. The soldiers moved forward. Jake reached for his gun, but he knew it was hopeless. 20 against 1 was not good odds. Then Lyra stepped up beside him. No, she said quietly. The words seemed to echo in the cargo bay. Suddenly, every electronic device in the area began sparking. Lights exploded. Computer screens went dark. The soldiers' weapons stopped working. Lyra's eyes glowed with purple light. Her markings became bright against her silver skin. Jake could feel electricity in the air around them. I am not a weapon, she said, her voice carrying power that made Jake's teeth ache. I am not a tool for you to use. I am a person. The power surge lasted only seconds. When it ended, half the cargo bay was in darkness. Emergency systems kicked in, but many of them were also damaged. Hayes and his soldiers stood in shock. Their weapons were useless pieces of metal now. Run, Lyra whispered to Jake. They ran through the darkened cargo bay. Behind them, Hayes was shouting orders, but his soldiers could not follow effectively without working equipment. Jake led Lyra to Docking Bay 7, where he had spotted a small transport ship earlier. The ship's systems were old enough to still work after Lyra's power. Surge, can you fly this? Lyra asked as Jake worked on the ship's locks. I can fly anything. Marine training. The ship's engines came to life just as Hayes and his soldiers reached the docking bay. Jake sealed the airlock and lifted off without waiting for clearance from station control. As they flew away from Kepler Station, Jake looked at Lyra. She was exhausted from using her abilities, but her eyes were determined. "What now?" she asked. "Now we disappear," Jake said, "and we figure out who we can trust." Jake had burned his bridges with the human military. Lyra was a fugitive from both governments. They were alone in a galaxy where everyone would be looking for them. But as Jake looked at the woman sitting beside him, he realized he did not regret his choice. Some things were worth fighting for. Some people were worth protecting, no matter the cost. The stolen transport ship was not built for comfort. Jake and Lyra had been flying for 2 days, staying in the empty space between star systems. They could not risk going to any major ports or stations. Too many people would be looking for them. Jake studied the star charts while Lyra tried to rest. She had been having nightmares since they escaped from Kepler Station. Her abilities were still unstable. Sometimes the ship's lights would flicker when she had a bad dream. "We need supplies," Jake said, looking at their fuel gauge. "And somewhere safe to hide." Lyra joined him at the navigation console. She looked tired, but her eyes were alert. "There's a mining planet called Dust Haven in this sector. It's mostly abandoned now." "Why abandoned?" "The mines ran dry about 10 years ago, but there might still be people there. Refugees, outcasts, people who don't ask questions." Jake plotted a course for Dust Haven. It was a small brown planet orbiting a dying star. Not the kind of place anyone would look for them. The planet's surface was covered in dust storms and empty mining equipment. Jake found a landing pad near what looked like an abandoned settlement. "Looks friendly," he said sarcastically. They gathered their few belongings and left the ship. The air outside was thin and tasted like metal. The wind carried dust that got into everything. The settlement was bigger than it looked from above. Most of the buildings were empty, but Jake could see lights in some windows. Smoke rose from chimneys. People were still living here. A man emerged from one of the buildings. He was old and weathered with gray hair and suspicious eyes. He carried an old rifle that had seen better days. "Who are you?" the man asked. "We don't get visitors here." "We're travelers," Jake said carefully. "Our ship needs repairs." The old man looked at Lyra with interest. Her silver skin made it obvious she was Zephyrian. "Got yourself an alien friend, do you?" "Is that a problem?" The man laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Son, out here, we don't care what color your skin is or where you come from. We only care if you can work and if you can fight." He gestured for them to follow him. "Name's Pete Garcia. I run this place, what's left of it." Pete led them through the settlement. Jake counted maybe 30 buildings that showed signs of life. He saw humans, Zephyrians, and a few other alien species he did not recognize. Everyone looked like they were running from something. "What is this place?" Lyra asked. "Home for people who don't have anywhere else to go," Pete said. "Refugees from the war, criminals who need to disappear, folks who just want to be left alone." He stopped at a small building near the center of town. "You can stay here. Rent's 50 credits a week. No questions asked, no names required." Jake paid the rent from his remaining money. Pete pocketed the credits and walked away without another word. Inside, the building was simple but clean. 2 rooms, basic furniture, a small kitchen. It was better than the transport ship. "How long can we stay here?" Lyra asked. "Until we figure out what to do next." But Jake was already thinking about their situation. Hayes would not give up easily. Neither would the Zephyrian government. Eventually, someone would track them down. Over the next few days, Jake and Lyra tried to blend in with the settlement. Jake helped repair mining equipment. Lyra used her knowledge of alien technology to fix broken computers and communication systems. The other residents were curious but respectful. They had all learned not to ask too many questions about each other's past. On their 4th day, Jake made a discovery that changed everything. He was helping Pete repair a water recycling system when he sensed someone watching them. Jake looked up and saw 2 figures standing in the shadows between buildings. One was an elderly Zephyrian male with white markings around his eyes. The other was a human child, maybe 10 years old. "Pete," Jake said quietly. "Who are those 2? Pete followed, his gaze and frowned. "That's old Kef and little Amy. They keep to themselves mostly." "What's special about them?" Pete looked at Jake suspiciously. "Why do you want to know?" Jake made a decision. Pete seemed trustworthy, and they needed allies. Because I think they might be like my friend Lyra. Pete was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down his tools and walked over to Jake. What exactly is your friend? She's a conductor. Pete's eyes widened. Jesus. I thought they were all dead. So did everyone else. But if those two are also conductors, they are. Pete looked around nervously. There are 3 of them here. Kef, Amy, and a middle-aged human woman named Susan. They found each other during the war and came here to hide. Jake felt his heart racing. 3 conductors plus Lyra made 4. That was more than anyone thought still existed. Who else knows? Just me and a few others. We've been protecting them. They help us keep the settlement running. Amy can fix anything electronic. Susan keeps our power grid stable. And Kef? Well, Kef is like a living library. He knows things about conductor abilities that nobody else remembers. Jake realized they had stumbled into something much bigger than just finding a place to hide. This settlement was a refuge for the last conductors in the galaxy. That night, Jake told Lyra what he had learned. Her reaction was not what he expected. She cried. I thought I was alone, she said through her tears. For so long, I thought I was the only one left. Jake held her while she cried. He felt something twist in his chest. Over the past weeks, his feelings for Lyra had grown beyond professional duty. He cared about her more than he should. You're not alone, he said softly. Not anymore. The next morning, Pete brought the other conductors to meet Lyra. The reunion was emotional. Kef hugged Lyra like a grandfather greeting a lost grandchild. Susan smiled for the first time since Jake had arrived. Amy, despite being only a child, looked at Lyra with hope in her eyes. They spent the day sharing stories and comparing their abilities. Each conductor was different. Lyra was the strongest, able to affect large electrical systems. Amy was the most precise, able to work with delicate electronics. Susan was the most stable, able to maintain steady power output for long periods. Kef was the wisest, understanding the theory behind their abilities better than anyone. We could teach each other, Susan said excitedly. Share what we know. Maybe even learn to control our abilities better. Jake watched them talking and felt hope for the first time since leaving Kepler Station. Maybe they could build something here, a safe place for conductors, a chance at a normal life. But their peace did not last long. On the 6th day, the ships came. Jake was checking their transport when he saw them on the horizon. Military vessels, both human and Zephyrian designs. They were approaching fast. He ran back to the settlement, shouting warnings. Ships incoming! Military vessels! The residents scattered like frightened animals. Some ran to hiding places they had prepared. Others grabbed weapons and prepared to fight. Pete found Jake near the settlement's center. How many? Jake counted the ships as they circled overhead. 12. Maybe more. The first ship landed in the settlement's main square. Human. Soldiers emerged, led by Commander Hayes. Jake cursed. Somehow, the intelligence officer had tracked them down. A second ship landed nearby. Zephyrian soldiers came out, led by a tall figure in elaborate armor. Jake did not recognize him, but the other Zephyrians treated him with obvious respect. Hayes activated a loudspeaker. Attention, residents of this settlement. We are here for the conductors. Surrender them peacefully, and no one will be harmed. Jake looked at Lyra. Her face was pale but determined. I won't let them hurt the others because of me. Nobody's surrendering, Jake said firmly. Pete agreed. This is our home. We protect our own. But Jake knew they were outnumbered and outgunned. The settlement had maybe 50 residents, most of them civilians. Against trained soldiers, they would not last long. There might be another way, old Kef said quietly. Everyone looked at him. The elderly conductor's eyes were bright with an idea that might be either brilliant or insane. What if we don't fight them separately? Kef said. What if we work together? Jake did not understand, but Lyra's eyes widened with realization. You mean link our abilities? It's possible. Dangerous, but possible. 4 conductors working as one could disable all their equipment at once. Susan shook her head. We've never tried anything like that. The power surge could kill us. Maybe, Kef said. But if we don't try, they'll capture us anyway. At least this way, we go down fighting. Jake looked at the ships surrounding their settlement. More soldiers were deploying. Soon they would start searching every building. What do you need me to do? He asked. Lyra took his hand. Keep us safe while we try this. It will take a few minutes and we'll be vulnerable. Jake nodded. I'll buy you the time. He picked up his rifle and checked his ammunition. Around him, the other residents of the settlement were preparing for battle. They might be refugees and outcasts, but they were not going to give up without a fight. Jake looked at Lyra one more time. If this went wrong, it might be the last time he saw her alive. Be careful, he said. She squeezed his hand. You too. As the soldiers began their advance on the settlement, Jake took position behind cover and prepared to fight for the people he had come to care about. The war might be officially over, but for Jake Morrison and Lyra Vex, the real battle was just beginning. Jake fired his first shot just as the soldiers reached the outer buildings. The bullet struck a human trooper in the shoulder, sending him spinning to the ground. Around the settlement, other residents opened fire from windows and rooftops. The soldiers took cover and returned fire. Laser blasts scorched the walls of buildings. Jake ducked as shots passed over his head. Behind him, the 4 conductors sat in a circle in the center of the settlement. They held hands and closed their eyes. Jake could not hear what they were saying, but he could feel electricity building in the air. Jake! Pete shouted from a nearby building. They're moving to surround us! Jake looked around. Pete was right. The soldiers were spreading out, using the abandoned buildings as cover. Soon they would have the settlement completely surrounded. A laser blast struck the wall next to Jake's head. He rolled to new cover and kept firing. His rifle was old, but reliable. Each shot counted. The battle lasted 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. The soldiers had better weapons and training, but the residents knew every hiding place in the settlement. It was an even fight. Then Jake heard Commander Hayes on his loudspeaker again. Cease fire! All units, cease fire! The shooting stopped. Jake kept his weapon ready and looked around cautiously. Hayes walked into the open, his hands raised. Behind him came the Zephyrian commander, also with his weapons lowered. We need to talk, Hayes called out. Jake glanced back at the conductors. They were still in their circle, still concentrating. Whatever they were doing, they needed more time. Talk. About what? Jake shouted back. About the ships coming this way. Jake did not understand. What ships? Hayes pointed at the sky. Long-range sensors picked them up an hour ago. 3 fleets, human extremists, Zephyrian radicals, and something else we can't identify. They're all heading here. The Zephyrian commander spoke for the first time. His voice was deep and controlled. They know about the conductors. All of them want to capture or destroy your friends. Jake felt cold despite the planet's hot air. How many ships? Over 100, Hayes said. Too many for us to fight off alone. Pete emerged from his building, still carrying his rifle. Why should we trust you? Because right now, we have the same enemy, the Zephyrian commander said. My name is Warlord Keth Moore. I came here to capture the conductors for my government, but I will not let extremists slaughter innocents to get them. Jake looked at Hayes. And you? Hayes lowered his hands. I still think the conductors should be studied, but not by fanatics who want to turn them into weapons. If we work together, we might be able to protect them. Behind Jake, the air was crackling with power. The conductors were reaching the peak of their effort. He could see Lyra's skin glowing brighter than he had ever seen it. How long until the other fleets arrive? Jake asked. 30 minutes, maybe less. Jake made a decision. It was risky, but they were out of good options. All right, temporary alliance. But I'm in command here. This is our home. Hayes nodded. Keth Moore looked less happy, but he agreed. Jake organized the combined forces quickly. The human and Zephyrian soldiers took defensive positions around the settlement. The residents were told to take shelter in the deepest buildings. 20 minutes later, the first enemy ships appeared on the horizon. Jake counted 30 vessels in the lead group. They were flying human military colors, but something was wrong with them. They moved too aggressively. Their formations were sloppy. Mercenaries, Hayes said grimly, human extremists who think peace is weakness. The ships opened fire before they landed. Laser blasts struck buildings throughout the settlement. One of the abandoned mining structures collapsed in flames. Jake's combined force returned fire with portable missile launchers. 2 enemy ships went down, but more kept coming. Then the Zephyrian Radical fleet arrived. Their ships were sleeker and faster than the human vessels. They landed on the far side of the settlement and deployed troops immediately. The battle became chaos. 3 different armies fought in the streets while civilians hid wherever they could find shelter. Jake stayed close to the conductors, who were still in their circle. Sweat covered their faces. Their bodies were shaking with effort. Whatever they were trying to do was pushing them to their limits. A group of human mercenaries made it past the outer defenses. Jake engaged them in close combat, using his marine training to stay alive. He took a laser burn on his left arm but kept fighting. Just as the situation looked hopeless, Lyra opened her eyes. "Now," she whispered. The power surge that followed was like nothing Jake had ever experienced. Every electronic device on the planet went dark at the same time. Ships fell from the sky as their engines died. Weapons stopped working. Even the simple radios Jake's people were using went silent. The battlefield went quiet, except for the crashes of falling ships. In the sudden silence, Jake heard new sounds. More ships approaching. But these were different, larger, moving in perfect formation. Jake looked up and saw the most beautiful sight of his life. The official fleets of both the Human Federation and the Zephyrian Empire were arriving. Real military. Ships with proper insignia and disciplined crews. The first ship to land carried Admiral Lisa Grant. She emerged with a full company of Federation Marines. "Stand down," she ordered. "All unauthorized forces, drop your weapons immediately." The second ship carried Zephyrian officials Jake did not recognize, but their authority was obvious. The radical Zephyrian forces surrendered without a fight. The mercenaries tried to run, but with their ships disabled, they had nowhere to go. Within an hour, the battle was over. The extremists from both sides were in custody. The settlement was safe. Jake found Lyra sitting on the steps of their small building. She looked exhausted but alive. The other conductors were nearby, being checked by medical teams. "How did you do it?" Jake asked, sitting beside her. "We combined our abilities like Kef suggested. For a few minutes, we were like one mind controlling electromagnetic fields across the entire planet." "That sounds dangerous." Lyra smiled weakly. "It was, but it worked." Admiral Grant approached them. She looked older than Jake remembered, but her eyes were sharp as ever. "Sergeant Morrison," she said, "you've caused quite a stir." "Just doing my job, Admiral." "Your job was to protect one diplomat. Instead, you started a small war." Jake stood up. "With respect, Admiral, I protected 4 people who deserved protection. I'd do it again." Grant studied him for a moment. Then, she smiled. "I know you would. That's why I'm offering you a new job." "What kind of job?" "The Federation and the Zephyrian Empire have agreed to a joint program. A sanctuary for conductors and other gifted individuals. Somewhere they can live safely and use their abilities for peace instead of war." Jake looked at Lyra. She was listening, carefully. "We want you to run it," Grant continued. "Both of you, together." "Why us?" "Because you've proven you can work together, because you understand what these people need, and because, frankly, the conductors trust you more than they trust us." Lyra stood up and took Jake's hand. "What do you think?" Jake looked around the settlement. These people had become his family. Pete, old Kef, little Amy, Susan, and all the others. They deserved a chance at a normal life. Where would this sanctuary be? "Here," Grant said. "Dust Haven is perfect. Remote, defensible, and the residents already accept differences. We'll provide funding, protection, and official recognition. And the conductors get to choose their own lives? Completely. No forced experiments. No military conscription. Just people living free." Jake looked at Lyra. She squeezed his hand and nodded. "We accept," Jake said. 1 year later, Jake stood on the observation deck of the new facility they had built on Dust Haven. The settlement had grown into a small city. Humans, Zephyrians, and other species lived and worked together. The Conductor Academy was training 12 students now, young people from across the galaxy who had hidden abilities. They learned to control their powers and use them to help others. Amy had become one of the best teachers despite being only 11 years old. Her enthusiasm was infectious. Kef ran the library, collecting knowledge about gifted individuals from every known species. Susan managed the power systems that kept the growing community running. And Lyra had become the heart of everything they were building. "Busy day?" she asked, joining him on the observation deck. The usual. 3 new students arrived this morning. Pete's complaining about the construction noise, and Admiral Grant wants another progress report. Lyra laughed. The sound still made Jake's heart skip a beat. Some things never change. Some things do. Jake pulled her close and kissed her. After a year together, it still felt like a miracle that she was in his life. "The council approved our proposal," Lyra said when they broke apart. "Which proposal?" "The one about expanding to other planets, establishing sanctuary cities throughout the galaxy." Jake smiled. It was ambitious, but so was everything they had accomplished. "When do we start?" "Next month. We'll take a team to survey potential sites." Jake looked out at the community they had built. Children played in parks that had once been empty mining sites. Adults worked together on projects that would have been impossible during the war. People were building a future. "You know what the best part is?" Jake said. "What?" "I finally found a mission worth fighting for." Lyra smiled and leaned against him. "I love you too, Jake Morrison." They stood together watching the sunset over Dust Haven. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people to protect, new dreams to build. But for the first time since the war ended, Jake Morrison was exactly where he belonged. The galaxy was healing, and he was helping it happen, one person at a time.